My husband's funeral was 3 years ago. I ironed my black dress the night before, and I remember thinking, who irons clothes for a funeral? I do. That's who I am. That's who I was. His name was Roland. No. Wait. That's not right either. I keep starting over because I don't know how to say this without sounding like I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. Maybe that's the only explanation that makes sense. His name was Jeffrey. Jeffrey Allen Marsh. We were married for 31 years. I buried him on a Tuesday in October under a maple tree he would have hated. Too much shade, he always said. Trees shouldn't crowd each other. The minister said something about rivers returning to the sea. I held my daughter's hand so tightly, she had a mark on her wrist for 2 days afterward. And then last spring, I saw him buying coffee at the Tim Hortons on Carling Avenue. I need you to understand something about grief before I go any further. Grief does strange things to your eyes. In the first year after Jeffrey died, I saw him everywhere, in the posture of a man crossing Elgin Street, in the back of a gray Buick on the 417, once in the cereal aisle at Farm Boy, which made me stand there gripping a box of oatmeal until my knuckles went white. Grief is a trick the brain plays. I knew that. My doctor told me that. My daughter told me that. So when I walked through that Tim Hortons door on a Wednesday morning in April, I had just left my physiotherapy appointment. My knee had been giving me trouble since February, and I saw the back of a man's head, the particular slope of those shoulders, the way he stood with his weight on his left foot. I told myself, not again, you're doing this again. I looked away. I ordered my medium double-double. I found a seat near the window, and I opened the novel I'd been carrying in my bag for 3 weeks without reading a single page. And then the man turned around. I dropped my coffee. The lid wasn't on properly. The girl at the counter had been rushing. There was a lineup, and the coffee went everywhere, across the table, onto my jacket sleeve, puddling on the floor. A young man 2 tables over jumped up. A woman said, "Oh, honey, are you all right?" Someone handed me napkins. I was not all right, because the man at the counter, the man with Jeffrey's shoulders and Jeffrey's way of standing, had Jeffrey's face. Not similar, not a resemblance. Jeffrey's face. The jaw, the slight asymmetry of his nose from a hockey injury in his 30s. The way the left eyebrow sat a fraction higher than the right. I had looked at that face every morning for 31 years. I had watched it age. I had watched it go still on a hospital bed in the Civic on a Thursday night in October 3 years ago. And it was right there. Ordering a large coffee and a breakfast sandwich, and reaching into the pocket of a jacket I did not recognize to pay with a $20 bill. My legs were not working properly. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's the truth. I stood up, and my knees simply did not cooperate, and I had to put one hand on the table to steady myself. The woman who had given me napkins asked if I needed her to call someone. I said no. I said I was fine. I have been saying I was fine for 3 years, and I am very good at it. I watched him take his order. I watched him say something to the girl at the counter. A joke, I think. She laughed, and I watched him move toward the door with the particular unhurried walk of a man who has nowhere urgent to be. My body moved before my mind caught up. I followed him outside. He walked south on Carling. It was one of those April days where the sun is bright but means nothing, the wind cutting straight through your coat. I kept maybe 20 feet between us. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know if I was thinking at all. There was something very simple happening in my chest. Not grief, not fear, something more primitive than either of those things. Recognition. The recognition you feel in your bones before your brain has a chance to argue with it. He turned into the parking lot of a low-rise apartment building off Carling, one of those brick buildings from the 70s with the small balconies. He took out keys. He unlocked a Honda Civic, gray, Ontario plates, and he sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, and I stood on the sidewalk in my damp jacket sleeve, and I watched him pull out of the lot and drive west. I wrote down the license plate number on the back of my physiotherapy appointment card. Then I stood there for a long time, long enough that a man walking his dog gave me a concerned look, long enough that my knees started aching again. Then I took out my phone and called my daughter. My daughter, I'll call her by her name, because she deserves that. Her name is Vera. She's 34. She lives in the glebe with her husband and their 2 boys, who are 7 and 4. She works in communications for the federal government. She is sensible and organized and has her father's eyebrow, the left one that sits slightly higher, and every time I notice it, I have to look away for a moment. Vera answered on the second ring. She always answers quickly when I call. After her father died, she made a point of it. I know this because she told me one evening over wine that she had decided she would always pick up when I called because she knew what it felt like to have a call not come when you needed it to. "Mom," she said, "what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I said, because I am 63 years old and I was standing on a sidewalk on Carling Avenue and I did not know how to say what I needed to say. "Can I come for dinner tonight?" "Of course," she said. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I'll tell you tonight," I said. I did not tell her tonight. I sat at her kitchen table and I played with my grandsons and I watched her husband. His name is Philip, good man, quieter than Jeffrey but steadier. I watched him do the dishes while Vera put the boys to bed. And I held the physiotherapy card in my jacket pocket, and I said nothing, because by then the doubt had started. Grief does strange things to your eyes. I had seen Jeffrey everywhere for a year. I was 63. I had been under stress. My sleep had not been good since February. The man on Carling had not looked at me. He had not spoken to me. I had seen a face for maybe 45 seconds across a busy Tim Hortons. What kind of evidence was that? I drove home on the Queensway. I sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock, and then I went inside and I made myself a cup of tea, and I looked at the license plate number on the card, and I thought, "What are you going to do with this?" I thought about it for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was a sensible woman. I had been a dental office manager for 22 years. I was not given to dramatics. I had once calmly managed a patient who had a cardiac event in the waiting room by calling 911 and keeping 2 other patients from panicking simultaneously. I was not the sort of person who sees ghosts. But I went back to Carling, not every day, 3 times in 2 weeks. The gray Civic was in the parking lot twice. On the 3rd visit, a Thursday, I sat in my own car across the street for an hour and 20 minutes. I brought a book. I felt like an absolute fool. He came out at 11:15. He was wearing a different jacket this time, navy, and he was carrying a reusable grocery bag. He walked down to the farm boy on Richmond. I followed at a distance that I hoped looked natural for a woman out for a walk. Inside the store, I got a basket. I wandered. I turned into the produce section and stopped. He was standing at the apple display, choosing apples one at a time, checking each one, the way Jeffrey always did, the way that used to drive me slightly mad, because who checks individual apples? Just take them from the bag. He had always done that, every single time. And then someone touched his arm, and I looked up, and there was a woman. She was perhaps 50, maybe a little younger. Dark hair, practical coat. She said something to him, and he smiled. Not at her the way you smile at a stranger. The way you smile at someone whose presence is familiar and comfortable. And she reached past him and grabbed a bag of apples without checking a single one, and he laughed. They laughed together. There is a specific kind of pain for which I do not think we have a word in English. It is the pain of watching something that was yours, something that was the furniture of your entire adult life, existing comfortably without you. I had not known I could still feel that pain. I thought grief had used it up, but it was there, sharp and specific, standing in the produce section of a grocery store on a Thursday morning. I put down my basket. I walked out. I sat in my car and I cried for the first time in over a year. Not the contained, careful crying I'd done at the funeral, not the crying I'd done alone in the first months. Ugly, gasping crying, the kind that fogs up your glasses. When it passed, I felt something settle. Not peace, something more like resolve. I wrote down everything I could remember. The building on Carling, the lice plate, the Tim Hortons, the farm boy, the woman, the laughing. I wrote it in a notebook. I'm old-fashioned that way. Jeffrey always teased me about my notebooks. And then I sat at my kitchen table and I asked myself one question. If this is him, if Jeffrey Allen Marsh did not die 3 years ago, then what happened? I had been at the hospital. I had been there when the doctor came in. I had signed papers. I had identified him. I had planned his funeral, his son. Our son, my son, from my first marriage. Though Jeffrey had raised him since he was 11, my son had flown in from Calgary. We had gone through Jeffrey's things together. We had sorted and donated and kept, which meant that if Jeffrey was alive, someone else had been involved. More than one person, probably. And my son had been the one to call me that night. He had been the one who called from the hospital before I even arrived. I held that thought very carefully. I put it down. I picked it up again. His name is Warren. He is 38 years old. He has his biological father's height and Jeffrey's way of laughing, which Jeffrey taught him somewhere around age 15. He lives in Calgary with his girlfriend and works in the oil and gas sector and calls me on Sundays, usually between 7 and 8 in the evening. He called me last Sunday. He asked about my knee. He asked if the physiotherapy was helping. He said he was thinking of coming out for the long weekend in May. I said that would be wonderful. Then I hung up and I sat with the notebook open on the table. I need to tell you what Jeffrey was like, because you need to understand what I am not saying and what I am saying. Jeffrey he was a good man in most of the ways that matter. He was generous. He was present. He remembered things that other men forgot. Not just birthdays, but the kind of things you mention once and never think about again. And then 6 months later, he's found it or done it or fixed it. He was a good father to Warren, not because he had to be, but because he chose to be, every day for over 20 years. But there were 2 years. The years when Warren was in university and Vera was finishing high school, where money was difficult. Jeffrey had left his job at the engineering firm for reasons he explained to me in a way that felt slightly off, slightly rehearsed. And he had spent 8 months telling me he was looking, and then he had found a contract position, and then eventually things had settled. I had not pushed. I had been working. We had managed. I had filed it away under. A hard time now over. I pulled that file back out. I am not a woman who investigates things. I am a woman who manages dental appointments and remembers to put the recycling out and sends birthday cards on time. But I know how to be thorough. Those 22 years taught me something about finding information, about following a thread until you reach the end of it. I hired a private investigator. Her name is not important. She came recommended by a woman in my book club whose daughter had used her for something related to a custody matter. She was professional and matter-of-fact, and she did not look at me the way I feared she would look at me, like a grieving old woman who had become confused about reality. She listened. She took notes. She took the license plate number. She called me 8 days later. The car was registered to a man named Jeffrey Allen Marsh. 1 L in Allen, not 2. Different middle name spelling. Age listed as 61, not 65. 4 years younger than Jeffrey actually was. Address: the building on Carling. Current occupation: retired. He had a provincial health card. He had a library card with the Ottawa Public Library. He had, apparently, a very normal and settled life on Carling Avenue in Ottawa, 3 kilometers from the house where he had lived with me for 24 years. He had been on Carling for at least 2 years, possibly longer. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called my son. I did not call to accuse. I want to be clear about that. I called because I needed to hear his voice, and because I had been sitting across the room from my wedding photograph. We have it on the mantel still. I have not taken it down. I don't know what that says about me, and I had been thinking about the night Jeffrey died, the sequence of events, the calls that had come in what order. Warren answered on the first ring. It was a Sunday evening. He sounded normal. He asked about my knee. "Warren," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." There was a pause, slight, perhaps half a second, maybe less. "Of course," he said. "What's going on? Did you know your father was alive?" The silence this time was not half a second. I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. "Mom, tell me the truth." He told me he didn't know what I was talking about. He used the word worried. He said he was worried about me. He mentioned gently that I had been through a lot. He said maybe I should talk to someone. He said he could fly out. If I needed him, he could look at flights tonight. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "I hired an investigator. The car is registered in Jeffrey's name. He has been living on Carling for at least 2 years. If you knew, Warren, I need you to tell me now, not later now." Another silence. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. "He called me," he said. "About 8 months after the funeral. I didn't know what to do, Mom. He said it was complicated. He said you were better off." I put the phone down on the table, not hanging up, just setting it down. I could hear his voice still coming through, muffled, saying my name. I let it say my name for a while. Then I picked it back up. "I have to go," I said. "Mom, please. I have to go, Warren." I hung up. I would like to say I did something calm and deliberate then. I didn't. I sat at my kitchen table and I shook, and then I made a cup of tea I didn't drink, and then I called Vera. I told her everything. All of it. The Tim Hortons, the parking lot, the farm boy, the investigator, the car registration, the call with Warren. I told it in a rush, the way things come out when you've been holding them too long, not in order, looping back. Vera didn't interrupt. Vera is very good at not interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I'm coming over," she said. She arrived in 20 minutes, which means she was speeding on the Queensway, which is not like Vera. And that told me everything I needed to know about where she stood. She sat across from me with her hands around a cup of tea, and she said, "What do you want to do?" I had been thinking about that since the phone call with Warren. Through the shaking, and the tea I didn't drink, and the wait for her headlights in the driveway. I had been thinking about what I was owed and what I wanted, and whether those were the same thing. "I want to look him in the eye," I said. Vera drove me. I would not have been safe to drive. We went on a Friday morning early because the investigator had told me he typically left the building between 9:30 and 10. We parked on the street. The April air was cold again, the sky the flat white of a day that can't decide what it wants to do. At 9:47 he walked out. I got out of the car. He saw Fihi from maybe 30 feet away. I watched the moment it registered, not a gradual recognition, a sudden one, like stepping through ice. His whole body, he stopped walking. I kept walking toward him. "Jeffrey," I said. He looked terrible. That's the thing I want to say. He looked like a man who had not slept well in 3 years. He looked like a man carrying something too heavy for him. I am not saying that to be kind. I am saying it because it's what I saw, and because I told myself I was going to say what was true and only what was true. "Elaine," he said, my name. "I just have one question," I said. "Then I'll do whatever I'm going to do. But I want you to answer me first." He waited. "Was it ever real?" He looked at me for a long time. Behind him, the door of his building was still swinging shut. Down the street, a bus went by. "Yes," he said. "All of it." "Then why?" It came out in pieces. A debt he hadn't told me about. Not from those 2 hard years, earlier than that, before we were married. Something he had thought was settled, and wasn't. Someone who had found him again. He had been frightened. He had made a decision he knew was wrong, and then he hadn't known how to come back from it. He said he had thought I would be better off. He said he had thought. He kept using that phrase. He had thought. The woman from the farm boy was not a new relationship. They had been together for 6 years. He had a different life, a complete one, and I was a closed chapter in it. I nodded. I let him finish. Then I said, "Vera is in the car. She's calling the police right now." She was. We had agreed before we got out of the car. I watched his face. I watched him understand that whatever he had expected, confrontation, forgiveness, an arrangement, a conversation, was not what was happening. "Elaine, you collected your own life insurance," I said. "Through the policy we had together. I don't know all of what you did. The police will figure that out. Warren will have to talk to them too." That's where we are, Jeffrey." I walked back to the car. Vera's hand was on my arm the whole drive home. She didn't say much. I didn't need her to. There are things I know now that I didn't know a year ago. There was fraud, significant and deliberate, and it is moving through the legal system the way these things do, slowly, with paperwork, with people asking me to describe events I would prefer not to describe. Jeffrey pled guilty to some of what he was charged with, and not guilty to other parts, and I have been told I may be asked to give a statement, and I am prepared to do that. Warren called me 17 times in the week after Vera called the police. I answered on the 18th call. We talked for a long time. There is no clean resolution to that conversation. He was 20 years old when Jeffrey raised him. He was also a man who lied to my face every Sunday for 2 years while Jeffrey was 3 kilometers away on Carling Avenue. Both of those things are true, and neither of them erases the other. We are something. I don't know yet what to call it. We talk occasionally. It is careful and it is complicated, and I am not ready to say more than that. The woman from the farm boy, I only know her first name. which came up in documents I was sent. She did not know. She believed he was a widower. I found that out through the investigator, and I have thought about her more than I expected to. She lost something too when this came apart. I don't know how to account for that. I just know that I think about it. My knee is much better. The physiotherapy worked. I can walk the full length of the Rideau River path now without stopping, which I couldn't do last year, and on the days the weather is good, I do exactly that. I walk the whole path. Sometimes with a friend from the book club, sometimes alone, and I stop at the bench near the old stone bridge, and I sit for a few minutes and I watch the water. I stopped keeping Jeffrey's photograph on the mantel. I didn't throw it out. I put it in a box with some of his other things, and the box is in the closet, and that's where it will stay until I figure out what to do with it, which may take some time, and I have decided that's all right. I am 63 years old. My daughter comes for dinner on Sundays now, her and Philip and the 2 boys, and we cook together, and the boys are loud and excellent, and they have recently become very interested in dinosaurs, which means I know more about the late Cretaceous period than I ever anticipated needing to. My grandsons make me laugh in a way that feels like breathing after you've been underwater. I did not get what I thought I lost back. I don't know if I would have wanted it, if I had been offered it. I think what I wanted, what I think all of us want, was simply to have been told the truth, to have been given the dignity of knowing. 3 years ago, if he had sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me all of it, the debt, the fear, the other life, I cannot say what would have happened, but I would have been able to choose. I would have been a person who was told, not a person who was managed. That's what's still angry about on the days I am still angry. Not the leaving. The deciding, for me, that I was better off not knowing. I am the only person who gets to decide what I'm better off knowing. I figured that out standing on a sidewalk on Carling Avenue in April, in a damp jacket sleeve, with a physiotherapy card in my pocket and a license plate number written on the back. Some things, it turns out, you have to find out for yourself.